Welcome back to another episode of Rapid Fire brought to you by SimpliFaster.com. As always, I'm your host, Justin Ochoa. Today, I have a special guest with me, Matt Tometz, aka Coach Big Toe. If you know, you know. Matt, how's it going, man?
Good, good, good. I appreciate you using my street name, but my government name is
Yeah.
Matt. So no, thank you very much for having me on. You know, we've been in contact. I don't even know how many years. Way back when actually a 1080 video, I was with Eric Allen, your
Yeah.
business partner. I don't know if you guys are still together, but
Yep.
how everything kind of comes together. But no, some super good questions, some foreshadowing for the listener to stick around for the whole thing. But talking good stuff with good people. So I appreciate being on the other end of the podcast, Mike, as a host myself,
Yep.
but also just chopping it up with good and high level people. So this will be great.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to connect with you, catch up with you. It's been a while. There's been some changes on your side. Let's talk about those big changes. So you've transitioned into more of a marketing role, kind of behind the scenes guy, off the floor a little bit. Talk to me about your role with 1080 and that transition from Northwestern and coaching and going into this.
Yeah, so it's crazy how it all works out. And getting off the floor is probably the biggest thing that people can wrap their head around where I'm not coaching. A full schedule, that's my like full-time job. I still have a few online clients and a few kind of in person, but I'm in charge of all of the daily and weekly, monthly strategy, marketing, posting, both for North America and the Americas, but also kind of globally, and helping out our Sweden team. So collaborating with everyone involved. There's 7 of us in the States and 30 in Sweden. But getting into it as a coach way back when at TC Boost when we had one, and then working kind of as a freelancer, making some little videos and articles kind of for Affinity over the past few years. So as a good user myself, so I know what I'm talking about, I could make videos interviewing clients that they had or users because I know the language and I get it, right? Not just reading a questions off a piece of paper like we talked about earlier, where it's like I can follow up in the language of a 1080, right? RF Max, FVP, LVP, which we'll talk about. Like it
Right.
becomes its own language. So it's a combination of, well, first I'm a tryhard at content because I like being creative and I want to give back. And I got my camera during COVID, like everyone else that we talked about earlier. And it was just like a nice kind of combination over the last few years, just becoming the best coach that I could be, giving back, making content. 1080, knowing that I just know the tech and I know how to make content, and then they're growing like crazy, and an opportunity to kind of join them full time opened up. And I always say it's the tech that got me into it or the product, but it's the people that kept me there. So just collaborating with them on and off for the last kind of few years, and really good people, and a product I do believe in as a coach personally. So it doesn't even feel like marketing. I'm kind of just talking about it. So crazy how it all works out.
Yeah. And I love that, man. Let's dive in on kind of one of the biggest things that I've learned from you on when it comes to 1080 and load velocity profiling and things like that. You actually wrote an article for Simply Faster on this topic, and one of the things that stuck out for me is the term peaking out during your profiling phase. So I kind of wanted to dive in on kind of what that means to you, why that's so important, and what coaches can take from that to be able to get better profiling sessions and ultimately better like programming for their athletes.
It's crazy to to think back to that article. That was one of my maybe my third one on Simply Faster, and that took me so long to put together. That was an in-depth article, and just how much like
It
information
really
has
was.
changed, and just like the processes and protocols, and the theory and the principles of that stays the same, but the X's and O's of how many reps and how far and load, like that has kind of changed over time. But so if we take a step back and just say a load velocity profile, which is different than a force velocity, that's why they're called different things. And I do believe that it is important to say what you mean and mean what you say, especially when it comes to tech and data and things like that. But a load velocity profile, so load is on the x-axis, independent variable, what you control. So you pick what load they run at, and velocity is on the y, the dependent variable. So you see how fast they can run at certain velocities. Okay. And the core assumption. Sorry, I'm Italian. I talk with my hands. Uh, Core thing is that you want to see the fastest speed an athlete can achieve at that velocity. a load velocity profile, right? So peaking out is basically just saying, have they achieved the fastest velocity? At its core is assuming that they achieve their fastest velocity at that load, right? So when you pick loads and distances, it's a combination of the optimal distance to where they can reach that speed, but it's not too far of a distance to where they get excessively kind of tired, right?
Mhm.
So on the 1080 graph or curve, as I call it, you can see every single step that they have. And basically, you just want to see one or two steps where they kind of start to slow down, which means that they did achieve or they quote peaked out at that load to make the best profile possible that they actually achieve their fastest velocity.
That makes a lot of sense. And if you get an athlete that, let's say, on a rep of their profiling session, they don't peak out, is that a scenario where, like, what's your first thing you alter? Do you extend the distance or do you mess with the load?
Yeah, so I think it's first like why? Like did they stumble? Were they kind of sandbagging it? You know, like just watch the rep first. And I guess this is kind of later in the questions, but I always say it's like a triangle of what I saw. So I'm watching them actually do their thing because I'm a coach first and the tech helps me coach. So I watch them do
Yep.
their thing. I kind of guess what the data would say, what the curve would look like, and then I kind of like guess and check my intuition by looking at the tablet and the data, and then I ask them kind of how they felt. So that's kind of the triangle of kind of how I think about putting it all together. So um, protocols are protocols, and you want to keep it as consistent as possible to be as reliable as possible. So it's not to say that it can't change, but you know, how can you compare, you know, athletes on a team if you do like, you know, 30 yards 25-20, and then you do like 2 10 20 for the load for one kid, and then one kid gets, you know, 2 12 23. It's like, well, yes, that kind of works, but then every time next time you also have to have him do that as well. So if an athlete is just
Uh,
too fast, that's a little bit different. But basically I would lean into like the R squared, if you know what that is, or that's basically how well the profile, so the predicted kind of dashed line, goes through all of the data points. So, of course, the heavier athletes, the stronger athletes, the load is not going to affect them as much. So, if you get some super freak, maybe you have a more advanced protocol. So, in that article, actually, I had a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. It was like one
uh,
1 8 15, something like that. I think it was 4, but we just do 3 runs now. Then it was like 2 10 20, and then it was like 3 12 24, something kind of like that. So you can have ones, obviously, like I wouldn't profile a prospective NFL D lineman versus like a freshman girl in high school, you know? So I think
right.
that you should be able to set yourself up for more success at the beginning, I would say, by picking the appropriate protocols for the athlete kind of first. But worst case scenario, um, just say, hey, you know, I'll give you 2.5 minutes. Let's do that again. You know, if the R squared is coming out super, super low, but low velocity profiling, if you do it well, I mean, I've done, I don't even know how many hundreds, and the R squared average is like 985. So if they do actually kind of peak out and it is an appropriate load and distance, like it's pretty much a straight line.
Yep. Last follow-up question on that. In terms of the R squared, is there a threshold of like what you would consider bad? Like I know in the VBT world, it's like usually if it's under like 0.96 or something, we might want to look at a set and redo it. And you mentioned 0.98 is around your average. Is there some number that you're kind of looking for that you don't want to be under?
Um, Whatever in the article it says the R squared plus or minus like one standard deviation. So that's probably
Yep.
a good rule of thumb. But if the athlete is peaked out, they didn't stumble, right? They have one or two steps where they're starting to kind of slow down. Um, then you know, obviously, if it's anywhere under, I don't know, 9.7, probably 9.8 as well. I would probably try
Yeah.
again the next day or kind of figure out what went wrong.
So going into your work right now with 1080 and the marketing things that you're doing, you have a unique perspective. Like you've obviously done it on the coaching side and you've used the product and you've used like several sports tech products that relate to speed. And now you're focused on one of those, obviously highly, but I think that perspective is really unique, and I think it's helpful for you to lend advice to coaches or prospective people that are looking for these products. Like, where's your viewpoint on sports tech and how it's growing and how important it's becoming, and where you see the future of training as it relates to this kind of conversation?
Yeah, so I think how I describe it, whether it was me as a coach or whether it's me as technically an employee now, at the end of the day, it is just hardware, and then I think we have really good software as well to make your life easier when you want to pull data and analyze it and kind of things like that. But you still have to pick the loads, pick the distances, watch the athlete do their thing, figure out if they peaked out or not. What's your threshold for R squared, right? Everything we just talked about. Like how much of that was the actual technology itself versus decisions that
Right.
you have to make, you know? So the example that I give is, you know, I became a really good speed coach in my opinion because for 3 years at TC
I
Boost,
can vouch. I can vouch. I'll
appreciate
support that.
appreciate that. For 3+ years at TC Boost, I literally did science experiments with the 1080 sprint and our timing lasers and our jump mats and kind of everything like that. And I'm a nerd. I think in PowerPoint and Excel. That's just I'm type A. I have a master's in sports science, and just the scientific method is question, collection, conclusion, right? Or hypothesis, collect your data, figure out what it means, or basically write your training program, collect data during it, figure out what happened, right? So every coach is
Mhm.
doing science, whether they know it or like it or not. And just some people are more attuned to like dive into the numbers and seeing what happened. So when I did all these little science experiments, basically every program, even if it's a little one just in one day itself versus like an entire training program, there is a lot of things that I believe or don't believe because I've seen the numbers and how that training or that idea has affected my athletes. So when I'm interviewing at Northwestern before I got that job, speed and data was a big part of my pitch about why I think I have a competitive edge as a coach. And they said, okay, cool. Well, we don't have one. I said, no, 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 this is what I believe because of it. I don't need it. Right. And honestly, which we'll get to later about coaching without one, I liked my speed training that I did more with less stuff because I had less stuff. I had more athletes. They were a little bit higher level athletes. And looking back at my year there, like I'm really proud of kind of how that turned out. But it's things that I generally believe about resisted sprinting and programming it and coaching and all these things. Well, I did it with bands and run rockets. So I think technology where it's going. So that's kind of the background how I think about and how I describe technology, right? How does it help you become a better coach? Where it's going is technology is just going to help coaches put their fingers on things that they couldn't earlier, right? Or it helps them confirm, deny, support their intuition. Like how many coaches have won Olympic medals before tennis sprint even existed, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Well, there was a lot of Olympics, right? Um,
Right.
and I can still do good training in my opinion without a 1080. So how does it support your intuition, help you become a better coach? But the granularity in which things that we can measure and put our fingers on and break down in a force velocity profile, right? We can get their force at 0.3 meters a second, their horizontal force, that's RF max, right? We have their V max and also their V zero. They're predicted based on their run and they're predicted based on their force velocity profile. And then we have the DRF, the decreasing ratio of force, how they run throughout the entire sprint, how much they pop up basically. So it's all these things of like, if you think an athlete just like pops up too quick, cool, you now have a number to support that. If you think that they've got better at
Mhm.
doing that or not popping up, well, how has that number changed over time, right? You still have to figure out that it's a red flag. You still have to know how to coach it. You still have to write the training program. It just helps you put fingers on this thing improved, this thing didn't. I think this is one of their weaknesses or strengths. Okay, cool. Now what do I do? So I think putting their fingers on stuff, and then it just makes that entire process kind of more efficient. So back in my day, kids these days won't understand. To do a force velocity profile on a 1080, you had to export the raw data. So a 1080 measures, or the Sprint 1 measures at 330 hertz. So in 1 second, it's, getting 330 data points of, you know, uh, time, speed, force, power. So, it's however many hundred Excel rows. Export that, paste that into JB Marin's force velocity profile Excel sheet, run some Excel
I remember
solver.
that.
Yeah, run some Excel solver, and then it would do it for you, right? And now with the software,
Yeah.
literally, as long as it's long enough and light enough, I think it has to be 3 kilos or less, basically 2 or 3, and long enough. And it also will tell you just if the data was good or not, right? I think it color codes and then says kind of like the R squared of an FVP. Now it does that instantly, you know? So I think it just becomes more efficient. But at the end of the day, like, what are you going to do about the data? Is it good data? What is important to you in pursuing? Kind of things like that. So, rant ended before I find new ways to say the same thing, just in different ways.
No, I love it, man. It makes a lot of sense. And honestly, it leads me to the next question so perfectly. And this the concept of, you know, data driven versus data informed. I think that's a phrase I picked up from you or somebody. Like,
Well, I stole it from
there's a
someone else, though.
difference. So talk to me about, what does that mean? What's the difference between those two? You kind of alluded to it earlier, but kind of break that down.
Yeah, so I think it can be a little bit of semantics, but I do believe it is important to say what you mean and mean what you say. And not that anyone was intentionally using data driven wrong, but data driven sounds cool when you see it on social media and kind of all these things. But informed, I think, is more like combining your data plus your coaching intuition. How do you put those things together in that triangle, right? You, what you see, your coach's eye, the data, what the athlete kind of felt, and then you kind of go from there. Versus if we were thinking about data is driving what I'm doing, it would just be a, copy paste, put it in a solver, and then whatever it says, I'm going to go with that, right? And a good example of this is if we talk about force velocity profiling and bucketing athletes, right? So RF max, one of the first kind of layers of, if you don't have a good first step, can't make enough force in the right direction, then start there. Shocker. Probably makes sense to most people. I want to say it was Cam Joss, his webinar on 1080 that I watched way back when. His threshold for that was 55%. And then when I was testing and consulting for a Power 5-4, it's weird saying that, a Power 4 football team, and testing all their athletes, 55% was just like a little bit too stringent, or basically like the buckets were a little bit lopsided versus what we would kind of want. So we dropped it down to 54. So that's not right or wrong, but for our athletes, with how we wanted to train them and get kind of a little bit more appropriate groups, we just thought that lowering it 1% was it helped us do our jobs better, right? And that's one of the numbers where what we found and what Cam had was pretty similar. And then there's other numbers like the V0 and F0, like we were off by like a decent amount. So nothing is right or wrong. It's just, what is your justification? How does it support what you're doing? How do you make your process as reliable or basically as repeatable as possible, and kind of things like that. So it's a little bit of semantics, but I think if people go into stuff being data driven, where it's like, whatever the data says is cool with me, I feel like that's not doing the most for not only your athletes, but also yourself as a coach, to view it more as your sidekick and how do you coach better, having the data inform you. Look at that.
Ah, I like that. I like it a lot. That makes sense. And like you said, it would sometimes words are powerful. Like Hunter Eisenhower kind of taught me that, kind of changed my opinion on that when we talk about force, right? When we talk about force, like you automatically think like strong, heavy, slow. But he opened my eyes to like force is just force. Like it could be fast, it could be slow, it could be light, it could be there's so many different types of force. So I really like that differentiation because I am a data driven guy. Like that was my go to. phrase, and now it makes sense. Like, yeah, the data is helpful, but ultimately I am making the decision based on the information that I got and my own, 13, 14 years of experience doing this, a lot of that with no data. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think that will be helpful for coaches to hear. Um, Last question I have for you, and this is kind of, you know, going backwards a little bit in the conversation, but I want to talk about, speed training with limited tech, limited data. You know, a lot of coaches may not have resources or access to something like a 1080 sprint or even timing gates. But what are some of your favorite speed training and it could be general sports performance training tools that are maybe cost efficient, really, really time efficient, and ultimately drives results for coaches and athletes to be able to get these results?
Yeah, so I think I know that I have an article on SimpliFaster on this and a video, but I always say, a sprint one is like 19,000 and some change, but we just say 20K, right? Or at least for the hook of my video. I had a 20K piece of technology and I had $60 really big rubber bands. And I used those just as much and I, couldn't live without either one of those. So those really thick resistance bands, like the blue, it's blue for Elite FTS.
Yep.
I think it's technically 1 inch, if I'm not mistaken, 1 or 1.5. The ones that are way too thick that no one actually uses, basically everyone buys because it's part of a set, right? But that
Yeah,
was one
you
of the
get in the set.
yeah, exact like it's just collecting dust. And that was one of the best things that came from COVID was we looped ours together, so there's two of them because the athletes aren't directly touching it and it keeps athletes a little bit farther apart. And what I like about the bands is it has a little bit of give, so it's smooth. When an athlete actually creates some force and some forward speed and momentum, it's not jerky, kind of like a run rocket where it's just like friction on a wheel. So the feel is a little bit more natural and smooth, but also it can get as heavy as basically you need as long as the athlete behind or the one who's holding them back kind of knows what they're doing. So it's $60 for a set of two. I think one is 30 or $31, and then I think Perform Better might be a little cheaper. But you can take them anywhere. They can get wet. Like you can do things in basically any plane. You could do running, you could do lateral stuff, shuffling, you could do like assisted broad jumps and things like that. So I think the value or the ratio of what you put in, basically your money, versus what you can do with it, I think hands down that is the most valuable training tool. And that's what I would use at Northwestern. I'd run rockets and then I had bands. So I'd put all the bands on my shoulder from the weight room. I'd go out to the turf football field where we warmed up, and we did our banded A runs, our banded broad jumps, our resisted sprints, and kind of things like that. So the double band setup I think is super super versatile. And then something that's more data-y, I guess. So if we take a step back again and just say like resisted sprints, how you program that is a velocity decrement. So a very brief overview: velocity decrement, how much slower is the load making you? Well, all it is just distance and time. So for example, a 10-yard sprint, let's just say it takes you 2 seconds. If you want to run at 50% velocity decrement or you're running half as fast, well, it's going to take you twice as long. Not rocket science, right? If you passed, algebra in 6th grade, you know how to do, yards per second and then all these things. So, so there's everything's on a continuum and it's a give and a take and a trade-off. So when I have an athlete one-on-one on a 1080, yes, I can get down to the 0.1 kilos and the 0.01 meters a second. Versus when I have 35 athletes out at a turf baseball field that I got to get them all in and out and warmed up. Not only trained, but also warmed up in 20 minutes, So I turned my data from super specific to super kind of general. So my group average was 2 seconds, 10 yards, 50% VDEC, 4 seconds. So whether it's with the run rockets or with the bands, I would say go and I would count out 1, 2, 3, 4. If you finish before 4 seconds, turn up the run rocket to make it a little heavier. If you finish after 4 seconds, turn it down so it's a little bit lighter. If you finish on 4 seconds, then sweet. It's like, oh, well, athletes are faster and slower and kind of all these things. Well, that's what's nice about a velocity decrement is everyone can find the load that gets them in that time range, you know?
Hmm.
So that's one of those things where you can scale things up or scale things down. And then also I can do the math where it was 25% was like 3 point something seconds or 2 point something. The numbers escape me. I'm getting old. But basically I had these general kind of ballparks and guidelines again for a general team that I was training for 10 yards and 15 yards and then 25% and 50% VDEC for each. So I basically had four numbers off the top of my head that I just like told the team, hey, this is what we're shooting for. Adjust your load appropriately. So all you need is basically Excel to do the math for you. It's like it's multiplication and division. You need a loud coaching voice and some sort of resistance, whether it's a band or a run rocket, and you can do some pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, that's super helpful. And I know um, a lot of coaches will appreciate that. I'm still going to try to get a 1082, but
I
in the
think I think
meantime,
you should. I
I
think
got
you
a I
should.
got a nice little formula. Definitely, man. Well, before I let you get out of here, tell us where we can find out more about you. Where's your social media? Any projects coming up? Things like that.
Sweet. So my street name, Coach Big Toe. That is where I'm on social media way too much, honestly. So Instagram, um, I don't know what it is about like Twitter DMs, but they're just not good. So if you want to hit me up on Instagram. But I'm on, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, my YouTube channel. I think I'm almost to 6K subscribers, trying to grow that. That's been a long process. I got my podcast. I'm at Tometz Performance Podcast. And something that I'm really passionate about is my Patreon. So it's my paid article website. It's only $20 a month, where I post basically 4 to 5 a month. Um, and it's, exclusive data stuff that keeps me posting a little bit more regularly because there are people kind of paying me, obviously. But things that I put a little bit more time and effort into, and I'm 46 articles in. I really enjoy and like every single one of them. So that's been a current kind of passion project of mine. So if you like video, if you like audio, if you like written, if you want to hop on the phone and just chop it up, basically anything that you want. I've probably been doing it since 2020, so feel free to reach out.
That's awesome, man. I'll definitely get those linked up in the show notes. And once again, I appreciate your time, man. It's good to catch up, and I think people are going to love this one.
Fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity.